In the previous video, we finished up by looking at how the marginal revenue product curve relates to the demand curve for labor, indicating that it is actually exactly the same thing. Well, now let's look at some of the elements that go into that marginal revenue product and relate this to our hiring decision. So let's look at some of the changes that might happen. So here we have various amounts of labor from 0 up to 8, producing various amounts of product. Well, let's change that. Let's change the productivity of labor. How about something like this? Here I've just taken all the products and doubled them from the previous slide. So I've just made all of my workers twice as productive. Now I'll go ahead and fill in the table and find out how many people do I want to hire now that my workers are twice as productive. Before, remember, I wanted to hire, I believe it was 3 workers. Yes, 3 workers provide me with the greatest profit. Now that they're twice as productive, how many do I want to hire? Take a few seconds, fill this out, come up with an answer, and I'll see you in a few. You should have gotten something that looks like this. What we find out is that when the quantity of product doubles for each of my workers, that doubles the marginal product of labor, which in turn doubles the marginal revenue product, which in turn means that now I want to hire far more workers than I did before. Before I wanted to hire 3 workers. There were exactly 3 workers that that in effect produced enough to pay themselves. Now that our workers are more productive, it's easier for my workers to produce enough to pay themselves since the wage is still at $15. That's an important key point. Here I'm assuming the wage has not changed. So that being the case, we find out now I want to hire 7 workers, and my profit has increased substantially from $9 before to now $91. It's very, very profitable for me to hire more workers when my workers are more productive, as is the case here. Now, you note here I didn't actually fill in all the profits. I was feeling lazy. So instead all I did, I looked at the profit at the point that marginal revenue product said I should hire, and then looked a line above and a line below. Found out profit fell in either direction, which suggests that this is in fact the maximum profit I can probably earn. Now if you want to fill in more, that's certainly possible, and you will find that that is in fact the case, that this is the highest profit, and it is exactly where that $15 cutoff would be. Now let's try a different change. Here I return product what it was originally, but I'm going to double the price. So instead of my product selling for $1 a piece, it sells for $2 a piece. So go ahead, take a few seconds, fill that in, pause the video, and I will see you on the other side when you have an answer. And the answer should look something like this. Like here, now we know the marginal product of labor is exactly the same as before because product is the same as before. My revenue is twice what it was before because my product is selling for twice the price, which means my marginal revenue product will be twice what it was in the original example. In other words, once we get to marginal revenue product, the case where we have a doubling of productivity and the case where we have a doubling of prices are in fact absolutely identical. That is, we want to hire 7 workers. At that point, the marginal revenue product will be right around $15. We'll have a profit of $91, and that's the highest profit that we can earn. Okay, now this highlights then 2 sources for how my demand for labor can change. Remember, the demand for labor really is the marginal revenue product. The marginal revenue product then, we can see, comes from our productivity and from the price of our product. So let's sum that up. Things that will affect the demand for labor. An increase in marginal productivity will in turn increase the demand for labor. An increase in price will also increase the demand for labor. Either of these will increase the demand for labor by, in effect, making it easier for our workers to pay for themselves. But this raises the question then, because if you ask most people and say, well, suppose workers are twice as productive, what happens? Most people will say, oh, then you lay off half your workers. Right? So why is it that we have this idea, right, that an increase in productivity will decrease the demand for labor? Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. One reason would be wrong. The other reason would be perhaps correct. Right? Now, the wrong way to think about it is this way of, oh, that means we don't need as many workers as before. Right? We can produce the same amount of stuff with half as many workers. While this is technically true, it totally abandons what we believe the goal of business actually is. The goal of business is to earn a profit. It's not to produce some amount of a product. Oh, I just want to produce 100 units of the product. No, that's not true. What you want to do is make as much profit as you can. If your workers are more productive, what we have proven is that you're going to earn a greater profit by producing more units of the good. Right? So, if your workers are more productive, you want to, in fact, hire more people precisely because it's more profitable to do so. Right, so here there's a big misunderstanding where people seem to believe that businesses are just out there to produce a certain amount of things, but that's false. The goal of the business is to make a profit. That being the case, and as far as we're more productive, we will in fact hire more workers. Right? But at the same time, this idea that increased productivity might decrease the demand for labor isn't totally nuts. Here's how we can possibly get there. The right way to think about this is to say an increased productivity will increase the demand for labor by itself. But at the same time, increased productivity will increase the supply of the product, which makes it perfectly possible that we'll have a decreased price for the product. Now that is the key. Right? If in fact there's a decreased price of the product because we're producing more of it, then that would tend to decrease the demand for labor. Right? So on the one hand, we have an increased productivity increasing the demand for labor. On the other hand, that increased productivity is leading to lower prices, which decreases the demand for labor. So we have these two forces pushing in opposite directions. On the one hand, we have an increased demand for labor from productivity. On the other hand, we have a decreased demand for labor from a falling price. Which of these is larger? Well, that's not immediately obvious. It is in fact possible that maybe the decrease in the demand for labor will swamp the increase. That's perfectly possible. But this really does depend on the elasticity of demand for the product. If in fact the demand for the product is very elastic, that is, people are willing to buy a lot more with a very small decrease in price, in that case, odds are good we'll have on net an increased demand for labor. On the other hand, if the elasticity of demand is very inelastic, that is, people don't want to buy a lot more of the product even if the price falls a lot, then what we'll tend to see is a big drop in price, which means on the whole we're probably going to see a decreased demand for labor. So which of these is larger? The increase or the decrease really depends on the specific product and how much price has to change for people to absorb the additional product that we can produce.